You are listening to the US of NA by Nation Beer, a series of stories about the people and places from every corner of the country who are helping fuel the NA beer movement. If you like this episode, please add us to your library in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen. For more great NA stories, including our many beer reviews, visit nationbeer.com.
Would you love to get free stuff in exchange for helping non-alcoholic brands get cans in hands? Or are you an NA brand yourself interested in expanding your reach? Join the waitlist to find out about our new Grassroots Ambassador program launching later this year. Just go to nation.beer to find out more. Hello and welcome to the US of NA. I'm your host and chief optimist, John Eggleton. Today's episode is going to be a deep dive into non-alcoholic beer, so get ready for that. This is also going to be part of an occasional episode series we'll be doing with our friend Tyler McMahon of Reducaholic to try and address some of the key questions surrounding NA beer, mainly those around safety, pricing, and some of the different brewing methods themselves. So we'll peel the curtain back on that a bit today. Our featured guest is Kevin Barnes, co-founder and brewmaster of Beaglepuss Brewing. He's also the past head brewer for Two Roots, which for those of you who have been in the category a little bit, you might remember that name. Tyler was our guest in episode 3 to talk about the role smaller breweries may play in the NA movement, which is something we jump a little bit back into today as well. After letting Kevin give us some background on what led him into NA brewing, we jump right into the safety factors around making and distributing non-alcoholic beer, followed by cost and pricing considerations, brewing methods, and lastly, we're an industry that's so heavily reliant on what's known as contract brewing, where the actual brewery production is through a third party, might be headed as it continues to evolve and grow. So get ready for a really technical and in-depth discussion, and we hope you enjoy. All right, we've got 2 guests in the studio today for this episode. First, if you listen to our 3rd episode, you've already met Tyler McMahon of Reducaholic.com, probably best known for having the most comprehensive map of where NA beer can be found in the wild around the country. Tyler's going to be joining us on a few episodes here as we do a deep dive into some of the challenges facing the NA beer world as it continues its growth. But our featured guest today can probably be considered NA brewing royalty, especially those who are a little bit early to the category. Kevin Barnes is currently the brewmaster and director of brewing operations for Beaglepuss Brewing. He's also a co-founder based in Providence, Rhode Island. The brewery is, at least. That launched in December of last year. He's also a brewery consultant, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But I think early fans might remember him a little bit more for being the head of brewing at Two Roots Brewing Company, which is maybe a little ahead of its time NA beer brewery that ceased operations, I believe, about a year or so ago. So, Kevin, first off, welcome to the US of NA.
Wow, what a welcome too. That's high praise. Thank you, God. Thank you, John, for having me on. It's really an honor to be on here. Thank you both for the great work you're doing in the space. All of us making NA beer are grateful.
Well, we're certainly very grateful to you. And before we move on, Tyler, want to welcome you back to the show. We're definitely glad to have your expertise on hand here as we kind of pull the curtain back on what goes into making and serving NA beer. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here. Great to talk to both of you, Kevin, as well.
All right. Well, first off, before we jump into our questions, I'm going to express my jealousy and regret and shake a fist at Georgia beer laws that I do not have a Beaglepuss in my hand right now, which both Kevin and Tyler do. And Tyler, not to be outdone by just having Beaglepuss, also has a Two Roots. So back to the cult-like following I mentioned, he's had that in his fridge for a while for just the right opportunity, and I think this is it. So you guys want to share what you're drinking specifically? Kevin, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I was shocked that Tyler not only has both of the Beaglepuss beers, but a Two Roots. That's some commitment. You must have known this day was count. But I went ahead and cracked a Beaglepuss cider, which I know we're talking beer, but we're super happy with this beer adjacent brand that we came up with called Them Apples. It's New England cider, dry hopped, like a New England beer. And so it's really cool. It's just NA cider. Yeah.
Awesome. Tyler, how about you?
I'm double fisting today. I've got the Beaglepuss West Coast Inverse.
excellent beer. I honestly say the first time I had this, it knocked my socks off. But I have to say that for Two Roots as well. And I have the Two Roots Hell is actually enough said, which is a hoppy Helles lager. And I love this beer. And when I first started drinking NA beer, I would take a can from almost each 6-pack, except for the Two Roots Black Milkshake, because that was just too good. And I put it aside in a box. And I was cleaning out my closet a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, most of the athletics and stuff, they repeated and whatnot. So you got rid of the full cans. But then I saw this Two Roots and I said, that's a collector's item. I must drink that. And sure enough, I opened it before the show. It didn't blow up. Tastes good. A little bit of hops maybe on, but I'm digging it.
Well, a true testament to good or well-made NA beer. And yeah, you can double fist. It's NA, right? It's non-alcoholic. You can do that. It's all right. So Kevin, let's go ahead and jump in. Tell us how your brewing journey found its way into NA beer. I know I should point out at the jump here, you're based in San Diego. Beaglepuss is based in Providence, Rhode Island on the East Coast. You also work as a brewery consultant, which we can get into. But how did you find your way into NA beer in the beginning? First obviously with Two Roots and now with Beaglepuss and your other clients.
Yeah, sure. So my brewing journey started here in San Diego at Green Flash. I always tell the story. I moved here, wanted to become a brewer, and I went to every single brewing company in the county with a printed out resume and a little collared shirt and asked for the HR department at each company. And most of them looked at me like I was, from outer space. Like, what in the HR department? And laughed at me. And it took me months and months of doing this to finally get somebody who actually needed somebody with no experience. But Green Flash was like, hey, we need someone to help us on the bottling line. We need someone to help us wash kegs. So I was like, sweet, this is my foot in the door. I had an hour drive commute every morning and afternoon to get there. But they were just starting out. And so I, luckily got in, really had a great time and got to learn the craft along with Green Flash as they learned the industry, really. So fast forward like 8 years later, I was head brewer of the San Diego facility, and I got approached by a guy that we bought tea from. His company had been purchased by a cannabis company who wanted to make THC-infused beer. And he was like, do you know anyone that might be interested in doing this? Meanwhile, I had sort of been daydreaming during my time at Green Flash about making a non-alcoholic IPA that I could drink while I'm working, And I remember thinking, like, how could I do that? That sounds really hard. It's probably not possible. And so I kind of just forgot about it. So anyway, this guy approached me and I said, I know somebody that would love to make cannabis beer. That sounds really cool. Let me talk to these guys. So I went ahead and took the job, and obviously to make THC infused beer, it needed to be non-alcoholic. So I said, okay, here goes my challenge. They had purchased, before they hired me, they had purchased both a dealcoholization machine from Germany and a small brewery to put it in. If I had seen the brewery that they had purchased before I took the job, I might not have taken it because it was in a sorry state. But we got it cleaned up. We got it figured out how to make NA beer taste good. That was quite the challenge. But the dealc machine helped.
Yeah.
And we weren't even called Two Roots at the time. It took another year before we came up with the branding, and we, it was a year of R&D and figuring out what to call the brand and the beers and everything.
What year was that when you first tried to get it organized? I know the brewery, I think, publicly launched in 2017. Is that right? Or were you guys at it sooner than that?
So, we sort of made the announcement. I got hired in 2017, made the announcement that we were going to launch cannabis beers. We didn't actually do the launch. We didn't even get the dealc machine until July of the following year, we were able to launch right about Labor Day 2018. And we can, to this day, say that we were the first legal THC beer made and sold in the country. So, that was quite a milestone. Pretty proud of that. And the product was phenomenal, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how fast the whole category has changed in a pretty short period of time. So you guys definitely we're ahead of the curve there. That's a good segue into, I think, our next question. So there's obviously a few different ways to make a good NA beer. You mentioned de-alc and using equipment, which is how many people do it. There's also other methods that involve just not fully fermenting or keeping a low amount of alcohol in the final product. There's pros and cons, I think, of each of those. Can you talk a little bit about the different methods and what some of the what some of the pros and cons and some of the challenges are for each?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two you mentioned are really the main two options, right? Create an alcoholic beer and then remove the alcohol, or create a beer that is, after it's done fermenting, or if you're not fermenting, whatever process you're doing is just going to have less than 0.5% ABV. They both have one challenge in common, which is making it taste good, right? That's just not easy to do. Take it a step further. If you want it to taste like an alcoholic beer or as close as it can be, that's another level of challenge. And that's kind of where I started at Two Roots. We really, having the psychoactive ingredient in there, we really wanted to make it an analog to alcoholic counterparts and really be like a one-for-one replacement. So my goal from day one as an NA beer maker was, I want to make this taste like an alcoholic version of lager, stout, IPA, whatever. And, I still believe that that's important. And that's kind of my goal today with Beaglepuss.
Right.
But then each process has its own unique positives and negatives. Obviously, with de-alcoholization, you need to buy or rent whatever the equipment. The very fancy vacuum distillation type units that are similar to what Two Roots used are just really expensive. They are really highly intelligently designed, German engineered precision machines, however. So they do a great job at what they're doing. And they work especially good, I would say, for German style beers, or even, West Coast style IPAs that are kind of, I think about the style of IPA being almost a ale version of a Pilsner in some aspects, should have
Right.
that crisp, clean, bitter finish and the hop aromatics on the front. So as far as de-alcoholization goes, that's my experience is vacuum distillation. I've talked to people and tasted beers that use the reverse osmosis type filtration, and I think those are less expensive, and you get different output as far as the byproduct, right? If you're doing reverse osmosis, you get like a 5% water sort of byproduct. If you're doing distillation, you obviously get distilled spirits essentially. So whichever way you're de-alcoholizing, you've got to deal with something being removed, which obviously the alcohol is being removed, but inherently alcohol being a solvent, things are going to come out along with it. You've got to address your recipe development and your process with that in mind. So whether that's brewing it differently before de-alcoholizing, doing something to it after de-alcoholizing, that's one of the challenges.
So yeah, let's bring in Tyler here as well. So there's been a lot of talk about safety around NA beer, and I think you kind of touched on, Kevin, what's happening in the brewing process there and making an NA beer. And I think specifically some of the discussion has been around the storage and distribution, whether you're talking about in cans or on draft. So Tyler, why don't you set us up with just some of those discussions, what some of the questions are, and would love to kind of, do a deeper dive with you, Kevin, on your thoughts around some of those. And and how the industry can address it at different levels. There's different ways to make NA beer, and some are more expensive than others. But I think if we could demystify this a bit for others, it could hopefully be something that more smaller breweries could then embrace as well. So Tyler, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially in the safety thing, especially in the past year, the Brewers Association has put out a lot of guidance, for lack of a better term. And on the safety side, what are some steps that you can take and risks at different levels, and especially like what cost does it add? And also we need, I think, take into account, like, what do you know maybe about how Europe's been doing it? Because Germany and all have been doing NA beer for a decade plus. And some of the studies out there that the Brewers Association cited, there's a similar study from a decade before doing the exact same process with a couple more variables. I guess it's a broad question, but I think we need to demystify it a bit more around breweries, because safety is important. I mean, we don't have the alcohol in it, but 5% alcohol isn't necessarily completely a safety guarantee either in certain situations, I think. And I have heard firsthand that a lot of breweries got pretty scared and stopped cold turkey just because that guidance came out. And so we'd love your thoughts, and also how it compares at the different levels: your tiny brewery, your big brewery, your 3-tier distribution, etc.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I've also heard people, I know one brewer who's on the Brewers Association technical committee, and when they were writing these guidelines, he was like, all of us are terrified of this. I was like, I don't know how you're doing this, and you're, confident in the safety. So the short answer is pasteurization. There's a reason why, 99.9% of all NA beer comes in a can or a bottle. Right? Once you get it in that final package and you can apply heat to that, or even some sort of preservative, then it's not coming in contact with anything else until it's consumed. Then you can really control the stability of it a lot better. And it's why draft is a lot more rare. If you do see it, it's often a small brewery serving it in their bar at their brewery, where they can really have a lot of hands-on oversight. But, there's a few other key things to consider for package of, can, bottle, or draft. And the first thing you mentioned earlier, Tyler, which is pH. I tell people all the time that I became a much better brewer, period, when I had to learn how to make non-alcoholic beer, because you just learn so much more. And one thing I never had even heard was that 4.6 pH limit, which you need even with alcohol for it to really be food safe. It's got to be less than 4.6. A lot of people in the NA game like to push that even lower, but that low pH is key. And then I would never recommend to anybody to sell a can or bottle that hasn't been pasteurized or had some kind of preservative. But there are other things too, like hops. They are known as to be kind of antimicrobial. So studies have shown higher hopping rates require less pasteurization in order to be shelf stable. So that can't help in every instance. If you want to make a Japanese style lager, you can't just load it up with hops, right? But for some styles, that can help.
No, I wanted to touch back on that little small brewery on premise thing. I think I have a water background, so fairly familiar with potential contamination stuff, and I think we're going to hopefully see a lot more smaller breweries doing it. And what would your advice be to those breweries, the little ones who want to do it just on premise? Obviously pH is one. I know one study said below 4 has as effective bacteria removal as alcohol, potentially, but I think there need to be follow-ups on that. And yeah, from a personal perspective, I completely agree with you. If you're going to distribute, you need to pasteurize it either chemically or heat-based in the can at the end. And I know of 2 or 3 breweries that are not doing that. And I've ordered from them. I can guess what they're doing. They say that was a food safe thing. But yeah, I mean, what's your advice to the smaller little ones who want to get in? John had a very interesting episode last week where the brewery was throwing the cans back in the tank and pasteurizing it in the tank, which I thought was interesting. But
Yeah, well, draft is something Beaglepuss would really, really like to do as well. Just because it's a little bit, more difficult, definitely doesn't mean it's impossible. We've served kegs of our beer already at our partner breweries that we work with on a very, very small scale, and it's just a lot of hands-on oversight. We did the same at Two Roots. We served a lot of draft Two Roots. It just comes down to just extra strenuous CIP, just paying extra close attention to getting all the equipment clean. You're starting with beer that is clean. If you can do an extra sanitation on the keg, or if you're taking it off site, I would recommend a single-use keg, like one of those, one-way plastic kegs would work. But the key, I think, is the draft line cleaning. So, we've talked about it at Beaglepuss, and if we're going to sell it to a bar, it's going to need to be a bar that is nearby us, that we can go there once a week and check on it and make sure that they've cleaned the line at least once a week. They've cleaned the line every time there's a new keg. And I would recommend daily sensory evaluation as well. Not that you're always going to be able to catch something by the look, smell, or taste, but there's just some kind of beer spoiler in there. You would at least find that, right?
I got like a little quick two-part follow-up on that just quickly, since we're on the safety side of things. One, I think like with the draft methods and the clean in place CIP that you talk about, wouldn't those be good practices in a good tap room or bar anyway? Because 5% beer, it's not going to disinfect a dirty line that would sit in there dirty for a week. It would take 24 hours to do that.
Absolutely. These are issues that affect alcoholic beer also. If you've got a high-end craft beer, you're not going to even want to sell your IPA to somebody that's not cleaning the lines and regularly and be on top of that. So if you're starting this program, start with a bitter, a highly hopped bitter IPA. Start with a sour, kettle sour. It's going to have really low pH. Start with something that has that extra level of protection already. Master that, then maybe you can try a stout or a Helles, The other thing I would say is really try to limit the amount of simple sugar. So do a kettle sour. Maybe it's not fruited, or if it's fruited, it was before fermentation, right? So you don't have that simple sugar that's just ready to be consumed.
So that's a good point. And the other thing that I actually want to kind of think about is like breweries themselves are usually pretty sanitary. And I think you mentioned the beer spoilage bacteria versus something that's going to kill you. Like a beer spoilage bacteria, occasionally you're going to get a beer that stinks, even with alcohol in it. Wouldn't you expect, if you have a bad practice for a beer spoilage bacteria in one of these environments, to enter quite significantly before something like E. coli or salmonella? I mean, because those are typically from somebody not washing their hands at all on a meat or lettuce line or whatever,
I would definitely expect, if you're being stringent in your oversight and you're paying attention, you definitely should notice the beer spoiler first. Yeah.
As you're describing, Kevin, certainly there is a lot of complexity to making good non-alcoholic beer. And I think there's also been a lot of discussion around the pricing, and some of this is maybe consumer perception. I think even those in the industry at the hospitality and retail level, there may be some discomfort. And more specifically, what I'm talking about is pricing in NA beer is the same or even more than other regular beers that are on the menu, and whether that's okay and how consumers are going to react to that. So can you talk a little bit about the, I guess kind of the labor side of that? And what do you think about the argument on the pricing side, and where do you think, we're likely to wind up with that? I mean, are there still some economies of scale benefits that maybe we're yet to realize since we're so new in this process, or is this just something we're going to have to deal with moving forward?
I think that it's pretty much where it's going to be already. So are there economies of scale to be had, especially for the craft brewers making NA beer? Certainly, absolutely. But I'm thinking about Heineken 0.0 and Bud 0. I don't shop for those, so I can't even answer my own question here. But I imagine they sell them for the same price as their alcoholic counterparts.
Yep.
So I don't think it's an issue for the consumer. I think that on the craft side, anyone who sort of pays attention to beer understands that it's harder to make NA beer, period. It's harder to make good, enjoyable, safe NA beer. It's, more labor, more equipment, more testing, and really just seeing the sales increases. The demand continues to grow. Sales continue to grow, and they're right now they're priced really similarly to their alcoholic counterparts. So if anything, I think the full value by the average consumer that NA hasn't even been realized yet.
Right.
And I think that more and more you'll see people willing to spend more for something quality, consistent, enjoyable, that doesn't give them a hangover or doesn't lead to bad decisions or overspending or, all these things. So.
No, for sure. Tyler, anything to add to that? I know you also have had a lot of conversations with brewers, and is that perception in their minds still out there? I mean, are a lot of them concerned and is that a big factor in maybe some of them being hesitant to go out with an NA beer?
I do think there's some brewers that definitely haven't thought that far into it, so they do think it should be cheaper. But I think on the other side, the ones who do start doing it realize that, well, you might receive a little bit of a benefit because of the taxes, lower taxes, obviously. That's pretty well offset by, even if you're brewing with let's say a slightly lower grain bill, higher temperature, alternative mash method, right? You still have different steps in the process that change your standard labor procedure, right? So that's going to change the cost. And I think the more and more everybody understands that, I don't think grains, what you're saving on the grains, I don't think they're a big expense compared to you have as many or more hops and then more labor. So that kind of offsets each other. But the tax benefit that's a benefit, but then the safety concerns possibly outweigh that.
So this is a good segue to talk about the contract brewing space specifically, which, as all of us know, or as many people know, that's obviously a big pillar today in the non-alcoholic beer industry. A lot of NA beer brands are developed that way. I think there's a bit of a hybrid model that's emerging. And I know, Kevin, this may be closer to what you guys are doing with Beaglepuss, where you're a head brewer working with a partner on the execution side. But there's certainly advantages and disadvantages. There's capital advantages to starting the contract route, of course, but there may be some control things that are maybe lost, or though maybe not quite as much with the model that you guys are using, where you're at least on site and, still overseeing the brewery process and maybe not relying on a contract brewers themselves to be creating the beer. So that might be a little bit different. But can you talk about that a little bit and whether you think that's going to continue to be a huge piece to the puzzle for the industry, or eventually do you see it going, with more breweries owning that themselves?
If I had to guess, I would say it's probably gonna end up more breweries owning their own sites, because mainly that control thing, but also just from a pure cost perspective, your costs go down if you own the equipment and do it yourself. However, the situation that craft beer is in right now, tons of fermentation space open out there across the country, and NA beer kind of taking off. And I think it's a really good moment in time. It's one of the reasons we're doing it. There's a lot of space out there, and people are trying to keep the lights on.
So a follow up to that, along those same lines, one of our earlier episodes, we had Lars Dahlhaus from Momentum Brewery, and very similar model. And he threw out an interesting idea that I'd love to get both of your thoughts on, of maybe NA only breweries working with local breweries to, be that NA expert and give them the recipes and help them do it. And that could be a revenue stream for the NA only breweries, and it could be a more cost effective and less risky way for those local breweries to get involved in that. So what do you guys think about, is that something you could see having possibility?
I think absolutely. I have consulted for a company that did that same model. They said, we're partnering with a brewery that's going to be dedicated to making our NA beer brand for us, and it's going to be mutually beneficial. I think it's a great model. I've actually proposed doing that with a couple of the local breweries here in San Diego. Nothing came of it, but just to say, I do think that it's definitely a good model.
Well, you're certainly in one of the right cities to maybe do that. Tyler, what would you add to that? Have you just based on your conversations?
I would say the same. I think it's a good potential model. I think I talked to breweries who just don't know where to start, and I think that could be a good model for both sides. And I think my plan is to help try and meet more and facilitate more on these things, because a lot are interested, and especially in Colorado, you'd see almost every brewery's got an athletic or a groovy or a best day already there, and some local draft kombucha, which I don't quite understand why it's not subject to the same safety issues. But I think there's a lot of potential. I think there's a small amount of risk. I think, John, you and I have seen it, especially you. Sorry for your local brewery in Right Side, because they're great, but they were, I believe, Partner Brewing, and I know one in Florida who I absolutely loved. One of the few really low calorie ones, super hoppy, super tasty. They also seem to have struggled because their Partner Brewery went out of business, so they were taking up some of that used fermentation space, and that first year and a half of establishing a business, maybe more, is challenging. And if your partner goes under, there's a chance you might get tired of it and go under too. And I think Kevin also may know of a third brewery that he helped with that. I don't know if that's the reason, but I know another couple NAs just decided to go after a year. But I think there's plenty of opportunity. And I also think, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, like, I'm in Colorado, in Golden, there are 8 breweries. Maybe they collaborate all the time, right? Why not they spread the risk and have a regional NA, or this other area I'm talking about, there are 5 breweries in a 20-mile radius. Spread the risk, have a regional NA, maybe contract brew at the beginning, or use somebody's space, hire someone like Kevin. I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation like that. And I worry, and this is not to point out anybody because it's across multiple, including ones that don't pasteurize, but I worry about the attitude among a lot of the NA breweries right now that are saying we don't want to share what we do. And that's my one thing about the safety debate, is I worry it's going to lead to consolidation and lack of trying in the industry. Because the way you can respect safety is a process thing, right? And I think the ones who don't pasteurize and send it and say we won't tell you what we're doing are just as guilty as the ones who tunnel pasteurize and say tunnel pasteurization is your only way. Because it's probably somewhere in between. Maybe there is a magical tipping point of a pH. Maybe there are standards. We don't know for sure. Europe's a few years ahead of us. There are preservatives. And I think we're seeing some collaboration in the industry. I mean, Mash Gang is collaborating all over the place in the UK, and I think they may or may not have some plans here. Obviously, you're doing stuff, Kevin, and Momentum says he is. There is, but yeah, I worry a little bit. I mean, I remember when I was just finishing up college. I mean, I was homebrewing a lot, and we stopped in a small brewery, and that guy was amazing. He toured me around. He told me how he made the beers. He told me how I made this. He's like, come intern for me. I mean, I was into water a little bit more than beer at the time, so I ended up heading to Nepal and Fulbright instead. But, that's how open it was. And admittedly, I've had some tours of some NA breweries, but outside of a few, I haven't gotten an insight into their process. And the only reason I have is because I found groups like Ultra Low Brewing on Facebook. I mean, Craig and I think the other guy's named Ben. They're awesome, and they just collaborated with a brewery. I just posted this morning, I should know the name, in Australia to make a new NA beer. And if you want to learn how NA beer is made, join that Facebook group, because they have every single method and they've tried every single method, and as a water filtration guy, like as Kevin said, reverse osmosis can be cheaper because it's a water filter, it's modular, right? But we miss that collaborating approach, and I worry. I hope it changes. I really, really do, because I love the big brands, just like I love New Belgium. I always drink a New Belgium. I love an Athletic. I love all those other guys. But if 5-10 years from now, the NA sector looks the opposite of the craft sector, I'll be a little sad. I'll be a little sad.
Well, we'll make sure we drop that resource into the show notes. So anybody who's interested in checking that out can do so. Last question I had for you guys is in an earlier episode that Tyler and I mentioned before when he joined us, which, by the way, I think that episode where we talked about local breweries getting involved in NA and what role they'll play in the future has been one of the most popular episodes we've had thus far. So I think this is something people want to know more about. But what do we think that quote unquote traditional brewery taproom experience of the future might look like for NA? I mean, right now it's primarily, at least in my experience, people might have athletic. They might have something else like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Happy to see them supported. But what do you think the taproom experience will look like in terms of what the non-alcoholic menu might include?
We're selling our cans, Beaglepuss, to lots of breweries in New England. Often I go to a brewery here locally or wherever I am, and I'll see athletic cans or, whatever local brewery they might have, Best Day, Rationale. So that's more and more common. So I would think that we're both going to see more tap rooms carrying other brewers' NA products and more breweries making their own. Every day you see another brewery getting into NA, and everyone realizing the demand is real. It's not going anywhere. It's growing, and they're getting customers asking for it. So I would say in the next 2-3 years, there won't be I shouldn't say a single, that's a little bit crazy, but there will be very few brewery tasting rooms not either serving their own NA beer or someone else's, definitely.
I agree with what Kevin said, and I hope, like I've always said, I hope to see more making their own. But I also hope to see, in the Northeast, you have Beaglepuss in some of the nearby breweries. I hope to see a little bit more regional distribution of them. I know I see Groovy in quite a few here, because Groovy is considered a Colorado brand, and some of their beers are made here. And also Best Day spread quite a bit when it was first launched, because everybody thought it was Colorado, and it was briefly. I believe their cans now say Wanaki, but and then I hope to see, now Imagination Brewing in Montana, for example. I'm guessing they're getting into other brewery tap rooms. John, on your episode with Mike and Mel last week, you heard how Two Phrase is selling their beers a lot locally to other brewers. And I hope to see that as a stopgap / it's going to probably be 40-50% of the market. You're going to see them carrying somebody else's. And I hope to see more of the local-ish ones being carried locally. Like, say, one brewery. 15% of the breweries in Denver make NA beer in 5 years. 70% of them are carrying those 15% NA beers, and the rest are carrying the national ones. It's not going to hurt the national ones' business that much. In fact, it's probably going to raise the floor for everyone, and it'll keep the culture. And that's kind of what I hope to do, facilitating with what I do and also what you do, John.
Once they see how many of their competitors' products they're selling, well, we should probably make our own NA because this thing's flying.
Right. Yeah, I hope that realization will hit. Well, this has been great. And Kevin, really appreciate you taking the time in this episode to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of these really important topics that people are interested in. And so, Tyler, I know there's always updates to be made on the map, Reducaholic.com. And by the way, I don't think I've had a chance to tell you, we've had several people email us at Nation just asking, is there a resource? So, I'm traveling next week to this city. Is there a way I can find out what the NA options are? And my answer is always, well, yes, there in fact is a great resource around that. So we appreciate you doing that. Any big updates, anything to share on that front?
Not yet. I'm hoping to get a couple sources up to date, especially up in the Midwest, because that's a heavily fluctuating market up there. And I'm debating a little bit. I'd love to put this out to listeners, what about the breweries who made an NA and for some reason stopped but kept the hop water? Do they deserve to stay on the map? What should I do about the hop waters? I think there's 10, 15 of them in Colorado. I just found out Avery Brewing has one. Should hop waters be on the map? It's a debate I've been having. It'll be a lot of work. I think they make probably about 1,000 of them versus 300 NA beers. But it is kind of nice to go to a brewery and drink a hop water locally, I suppose. It's actually a question for the audience, like.
Yeah, we'll share any responses we get. Well, thanks to both of you. We appreciate you spending the time. And we plan to revisit these topics occasionally and getting some good discussion on what are some of these challenges the industry is facing and how do we see ourselves through them. So thank you both for joining.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Again, many thanks to both Kevin and Tyler for joining us today. They each have a lot of knowledge on the industry and the factors involved with making great non-alcoholic beer safely and cost-effectively. You can check out Kevin's current brewery at beaglepuss.com, or if you're interested in collaboration with him, go to thebeersheamus.com, which is his consulting site. To see what Tyler's up to, or to visit his map of any beer around the country, visit Reducaholic.com. And by the way, all of those links are in the show notes as well. Anyways, we've got a handful of upcoming episodes in the works coming up, including with the founders of a couple of leading NA breweries, one based in New England, the other in Canada, the latter of which will be our first conversation with a top brewer based there. And later in August, we'll be talking to the leader of a large advocacy organization responsible for lobbying on behalf of the beer industry and its economic impact at the federal level, which we're very much looking forward to. Until then, stay cool out there and cheers.